So I thought I'd make a video breaking down the differences between the Winspace T1550 and the SLC3, just in case anyone is confused about which bike is going to be better suited to their needs. Guys, welcome back to the What Life. Let's roll. So obviously this video is for entertainment purposes, but both these frames have been provided to me by the brand for free. All the thoughts and opinions are actually my own, and I thought I'd share them with you. The obvious difference between the two is simply they are both designed to do different things, and I'm going to take you through the key features that change the way that they handle, change the way that they ride, and the way that they look, that highlights the differences between the two, so that perhaps you can make a decision about which one is better suited to your needs. Obviously we have the T1550. I don't have this built up anymore. I had to pull all the components off this to get the SLC3 up and running. This 1550 is the aero bike. The SLC, which stands for Super Light Climber 3.0, is their climbing bike. Let's start with the very simple differences. The only difference when these two bikes were built up was the two saddles that I have on them now. I have a slightly longer, narrower saddle, and then I have a newer, slightly more wider, shorter saddle, and I think one is slightly less weight than the other. And this is what we're going to get into first. The full build weight of this bike. Finally answer the question that everyone's been asking. We are 7.95, a little bit heavier than I thought it was, but we are all right with that. Now the weight build on this one is about 7.3 kg. I'm not a weight weenie, I don't build bikes to be light, so the fact that I've got this to 7.3, all I've done is chuck on components. I bought a Sram Force group set with power meter, chucked it on. 7.3 kg. So there are obviously the key differences in frame weight, and that is the kind of selling point of the SLC. But also what makes it lighter, we're going to go into that and we're going to look at how that affects some of the kind of ride abilities and handling of the bike. Kicking things off with the T1550. I loved this bike. I loved riding it. I loved the geometry of it. And here's the key differences between the two. The stack height and the head tube height, or the height of the head tube, is different to the SLC. It's slightly shorter head tube. It has a lower stack height, so you sit lower on the bike, and the reach from the bottom bracket through to the bars, or the front of the bars, the reach is slightly longer. So you're lower and longer than when you are on the SLC, which basically means that the stack height is slightly longer and the reach is slightly shorter. So you will sit upright a bit more on the SLC. That's first and foremost, but that is partly why I absolutely loved this bike, because of the position it got me into. And I've been running the same size bars, same size stem on both these bikes. Now this is the interesting thing. I've got a 95mm, the Winspace bar and stem, the 95mm, and I've swapped it over very simply. I think I could get away with kind of going maybe 10mm up on a stem length riding on the SLC because of the difference in the way that the kind of the reach is working, but that's just me. I feel like the offset of the saddle is a little bit further, I think that's right, a little bit further back on the SLC, whereas because the top tube length is, stick with me guys, it is slightly complicated because the top tube length is slightly longer on the SLC, but the actual position when you're sat in the saddle, the reach is longer on the T1550. So it drops you down into that more aero position. I loved it. That was just a me thing. That's like a me body shape geometry thing. Loved it. Got on really, really well with it. That's not to say I don't like the SLC's position, but you are more upright because the slightly kind of shorter reach, slightly higher stack. And you will feel that sensation when you are riding with things like cornering. And getting into cornering, this is going to be my next point, is the handling of the two bikes. And you can clearly see the differences in the frames. Obviously, we have some kind of real factors that are going to influence the way that both of these bikes handle. The bottom bracket and the kind of down tube on the T1550 feels like it provides a lot more stability. You get these nice thick chain stays, and you get quite a lot of, well, reasonable amount of material coming on the seat stays. And you get this like T-shaped thing, which it features on both, but it's certainly more prolific on the 1550 Aero bike. And this is interesting because the front fork, you can clearly see the difference in the width of the front fork. Imagine that being up in the frame. The handling and ability of that front fork is stiffer, firmer, and you're going to be able to move that bike around without it flexing quite so much. And I'm not necessarily a super aggressive bike rider, but I still feel these things. You still feel when you are lower and your reach is slightly longer, because that drops you into a different position. The way that the bike handles, your kind of trust and ability or your trust in the bike and the way that it handles does get affected by these things. And I found that I really loved the way that the 1550 handled. But again, let's bring it back round. It's a slightly heavier frame and ended up being a slightly heavier build. Now, the key components of the SLC that make it different, and I'll go into why I absolutely love this bike in a second. Some of the key components about it, obviously it's, they have stated a 700 gram frame or sub 700 gram frame in a certain size, unpainted and everything like that. But the key differences are obviously you don't get quite so much carbon enforcement on the seat stays, slightly narrower chain stays. And I actually feel like the angle that drops the bottom bracket lower between the bottom bracket and the cassette is slightly different. So the bike actually sits a tiny bit lower. I mean, we're talking like millimeters here, but I definitely felt it. But the key difference is in terms of handling that I felt when kind of moving this bike around is the width and strength of the front fork, and the you're always going to get some flex in the wheels, but bear in mind I've been running exactly the same wheels on both bikes. I just felt like obviously the handling of this with more carbon fiber that sits with a low center of gravity just made me feel more comfortable. I really enjoyed it. I love this. I genuinely did really love this bike. And it's not to say I don't love the SLC, but I love this for different reasons. Before we dive into the styling of these two bikes, and believe me, I have a lot to say on that, there's one key difference in the way that both these bikes are made. That is, the SLC 3 still has a press-fit bottom bracket. Now, the new generation of the T1550 has a T47 thread bottom bracket that allows you to run slightly larger bearings. Now, why is that important? You might be, like me, a bit of a SRAM fanboy. I love it. I don't think I'd ever ride Shimano again, which basically means I use a dub axle slightly wider. And guys, I know I bang on about this all the time, but the bottom bracket is one of the key features in a bike that is definitely going to make the way or change the way that a bike rides and feels. And I'm going to actually show you why it is so important. I ran the T1550 for about 6 months. I used, and this one, sorry, just to be clear, had a press fit bottom bracket. And I'm going to show you what's happened after 6 months of riding it through the summer. I did a few months early in the year where I had kind of like early, well, maybe late winter, spring weather where it was a little bit wet, but I'm a fair weather rider. And the bottom bracket, the bearings in this, which is a BB86, and I used to thread together the Token Ninja, they are terrible. And I only realized it when I took the components out to put it on the new build, just how bad they are. So if you are a SRAM fanboy, building a bike that's exactly like this one is a little bit risky, and you probably do have to put some effort into trying to find a bottom bracket that you think is going to work for you, and then do everything you can to protect it, because the bottom bracket on the 1550 lasted about 6 months, and that the bearings, well, you either need to change the bottom bracket or replace the bearings. And that is a key difference. But the new generation of the 1550 has the T47, which allows you to run slightly larger bearings. Hopefully you don't quite have that same problem, and maybe you can get yourself a slightly better bottom bracket than the thread together Token Ninja bottom bracket that I used for mine. Okay, let's talk styling, because this is going to be my favorite part of the video. I think the SLC looks fantastic, and I think it looks fantastic because it keeps a lot of the classic style that comes with a bike, and especially in this colorway with matte black, I just think it looks awesome. I like the carbon, like that kind of bare exposed carbon with the black decals. If they made the T1550 with that same kind of bare carbon with the black decals, I think this bike would look a ton better. The key things I like about the 1550 is this slightly sloping top tube. I think it looks gorgeous. Obviously the 1550 is aero optimized, so you get a few little kind of subtle notes of aerodynamics, the kind of slight pinch in the header tube, slightly thicker, broader, and the shape of the down tube, the way that it tapers off at the top. And then obviously the big thing being the seat tube and the seat post are D-shaped, whereas the SLC has that classic 23.9 mil seat tube. So in theory, you can replace this with any seat tube you want, although the seat tube itself does come, or the seat post does come when you are provided with a bike. When you buy it, that gets delivered with it. But I think these are the features, or this is the thing that just makes me so attracted to this bike. The classic styling of it, the fact that it's not over-engineered over on the seat stays. I don't know, I just find it really attractive. The only thing I would like is a slightly broader, slightly bigger front fork. Just a little bit more control, a little bit more feeling and strength with the handling. But that's just me. I am a bit of a nervous descender. I'm a bit nervous with everything when it comes to bikes, kind of cornering and things like that. But slightly thicker, broader front fork would be great. But in terms of styling, I think the matte black look with the black logos looks fantastic. It's not that I don't necessarily like the white decals or the white paint job on this particular 1550. I just think I would prefer it to be in the same style as what I have here, which is everything black, that bare carbon look. I just don't think it can be beaten. I think it looks great. I think simple often wins out in these things, certainly. You know, there is no need to kind of try and be too extravagant about things. I love the look of the T1550, the broad chainstays. I think it adds to that kind of aerodynamic shape. I think it looks good, especially when riding it. I think the decals and the styling of it could be slightly better. Something simple, nice and clean. I haven't actually checked out the new version of the 1550 and what colorways it comes in, but I'm hoping that you can get something that's just super clean, super simple, and subtle as well, because I think that goes a long way. Because now that I built up the SLC, if I had these two bikes, well, actually, I do. I have the chance to put these bikes on the wall, and I now mount the SLC, and I think it looks great when it's just mounted on the wall, not even being ridden. So when I do ride it, I think it absolutely looks fantastic, partly because of the classic styling of it and the way that it is shaped. Whereas the 1550, you know, if I had a way of getting this as a kind of bare carbon frame, 100% I would tick that box. I'd get that delivered in a heartbeat. So let me run you through the highlights. Obviously, the first thing is weight. This is a lot lighter, 7.2 to, I think this was like 8.7. We are 7.95. The second thing is the obvious difference in nature of the bikes. This being more of a climbing bike, it is geared towards lightweight. It doesn't have so many aero features on it. It has a round seat tube rather than the D shape or the seat post on the 1550. And a few other components. I also feel like the 1550 has a really firm, broad bottom bracket, or the strength of the bottom bracket when you're out and moving, and a lot of people refer to this bike as being quite firm and almost to the point of being harsh, which I actually think is a good thing, because you get a lot of strength through the bottom of the bike. Your position is a little bit lower, and I just feel like I can get the power down and it is enjoyable to ride. Whereas the lightness and perhaps having less carbon fiber, to the detriment of when you feel like you're out the saddle, it feels like there's nothing underneath you. It feels like a lightweight bike, as you would in a sprint. It's not designed to do that. Now, I'm not an out-and-out climber. I weigh 80 kg. The second thing to bring up as a highlight is the styling of the two bikes. I think the classic styling of the SLC, the dark matte frame, exposed carbon, hands down, wins. I think it looks gorgeous. I love the way this bike has been built up. I love the way that it kind of looks when I get to turn up to a group ride. I feel way more comfortable turning up to group rides riding this, and sometimes kind of turning up to a group ride riding a brand that people don't know. You know, you feel like you have to explain yourself sometimes, or not explain yourself, but where you got it, where it came from, and things like that. Especially in UK culture, I think a lot of times people will just, rather than say like, oh, what bike is that? When they look at the SLC, the kind of most common thing is, oh, that looks really good. And I think that's, you know, for me, 80% of the battle, because I'm not going to perform well, so I might as well look good. The last thing to say about the two bikes is the bottom brackets. SLC is still BB86, so if you are a SRAM fanboy, just be a little bit careful. Like I said, the bearings on my BB86 Gen 2 1550 are terrible now. Nothing to do with Winspace, but the fact that they've now changed the T1550, the latest one, to a T47 allows you to run slightly larger bearings. Hopefully you might not have the same issue that I've had, where these actually need replacing after 6 months. That's my wrap up, guys. The simple fact of the matter is the position on the bike is very different. Longer, shorter for the aero bike, sitting up slightly higher, and the stack height is slightly higher on the SLC. Both designed for different things, both have different uses. They both obviously look very different. I guess that's up to you which you prefer. Do drop me a message down below if you are interested in either one. I will give you a full breakdown on how I find them, what I like about them, and just have this chat with you guys, because I do get quite a few messages about it. Guys, thanks for joining in. Drop your messages below. I'll see you guys on another one soon.